Time has come to consider how do you comply with a wide variety of governance codes. We have seen in previous videos that actually the financial codes are starting to have a lot in common, and some of the concerns, such as the role of shareholders in actually getting the shareholders to play a role, to them to start to become activists rather than Burl-like, to rescue capitalism from the death of capitalism, you like, is becoming an international concern, even in countries like China, which would claim not to be capitalist and to be socialist with Chinese characteristics, which is looking a lot like free market capitalism. So there is this awful a lot of convergence. And if you're therefore trying to look to run a proper international investment and investor board, how do you cope with that? Well, to a certain extent, it will depend on the type of investment you're going to go for. So let's have a look at what exists already in the world of governance codes. The two major ones are probably Sarbanes-Oxley and Basel III, which one was developed in Europe. Basel is a city in Switzerland, one that I love a lot actually. We'll be going there this summer. And Sarbanes-Oxley, which is the US version of that, which has a number of things. So what is the thing? Well, the final version of Sarbanes-Oxley was aimed at assuring that capital allocation is more risk sensitive. It was created in 2002, but on its 20th anniversary, attempts have been made to abolish it, but at the moment they've not yet been successful. And in fact, there seems to be, under the Biden administration, an attempt to strengthen Sarbanes-Oxley and to introduce elements of Basel III into it. So the role of Sarbanes-Oxley in this creation is to ensure that capital allocation is more risk sensitive, i.e. effectively it will not allow you to try to avoid you taking heavy risk because of moral hazard. It will enhance disclosure requirements which allow market participants to assess the capital adequacy of an institution. This will mean that people can actually get the information they need. It will assure that credit risk, operational risk and market risk are quantified based on data and formal techniques. And it attempts to align economic and regulatory capital more closely to reduce the scope for regulatory arbitrage, i.e. deciding to move your investments abroad because you feel that there will be less regulation and less governance on them. So it'll try and make a message to the international capital that actually economic and regulatory rules will catch you up. Yeah. The final parts of Sarbanes-Oxley has tried to address this very issue, and there are still areas where regulatory capital requirements will diverge from the economic capital requirements. Basel II itself has left unchanged the question of how to actually define bank capital, which diverges from accounting equity in important respects. In a very small way, Basel II is recognising the problems that we have talked about. That actually, the classic capital definitions, the profit definitions, etc., are no longer aligned with accounting things. Accounting is a matter of opinion. Accounting profit, accounting income, accounting things, doing that. The Basel I definition, which is a very simplistic one, has remained in place and has tried to pretend as if there is no dissolution change between them. But they need to continue and they need to learn about that. So Basel II came in 2004, and although it's quite old, it's still very relevant. Basel III came into existence from 2010, and the specific role of Basel III was to enhance the resilience of the systems, and in order to make sure that some of these problems with regulatory capital, etc., were overcome. All of the above contain quite severe and quite responsible additional corporate board responsibilities. They make sure that the boards recognise that there will be criminal penalties if they break the rules. One of the problems so far has been that, apart from Iceland, there has been very little attempt to actually hold legally and criminally to account those who have broken the rules. They created new quasi-public agency boards. The Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or PCAOB, which charge of overseeing, regulating, inspecting disciplinary accounting firms and their results of public companies, was one such board that was created. They argue for auditor independence. Now, this seems to be a bit of a shibboleth in the idea that somehow auditors have long been too much in the pockets of companies. Whereas the reality is, as long as the payment system remains as it is, individual auditors may feel too loyalty bound to any company, whereas most of the large international auditing firms, in reality, no one company provides them with sufficient income for them to be willing to destroy themselves. However, their own lack of internal governance has resulted in branches such as with Enron and Arthur Andersen destroying the auditor. So, but all of them have also specifically tried to address corporate governance by saying the board must take responsibility for it. The days when the board could claim it was nothing to do with us, Gov, it was being done by that little person in the office over there who was the manager for corporate governance, that is no longer going to be acceptable. If you're taking the big bucks and you're running the company, you must take responsibility for that corporate governance, and therefore you must allow external regulators to take internal assessments of your control. The argument about whether or not the internal assessment of control, of course, is quite an interesting one, because the hard line you'd expect is they'd actually say internal control assessment means, and Sarbanes-Oxley does try this to a certain extent, it means that you actually will check whether or not the systems are fit for purpose. They are actually capable of controlling and stopping financial fraud. Whereas the reality, and often with Basel III, is that being actually, they are very much, have you described them correctly? Have you said what they're going to be doing? Are they now acceptable? And they do not really test them against fitness for purpose, which can be a little bit strange. There is also a lot of requirements under both Sarbanes-Oxley and Basel III for enhanced financial disclosure, giving more information about the economic state of the company to anyone who's willing and interested in investing in it, and also perhaps to further stakeholders due to the open nature of the information that's being provided. An early attempt at developing a corporate governance code, certainly in the UK model, the idea was in the US, was the Cadbury report and the Sons of Cadbury, which is a number of further reports that came on. And the main issue of this one was to, by it was published in 1992, was to review the structure and responsibilities of board and directors, recommending code and practice. The boards of all listed companies should comply with the code of best practice. All listed companies should make a statement about their compliance with the code in their report and accounts, as well as give reasons for any areas of non-compliance. The code of best practice segregated into 4 sections. The respective recommendations are: Board of Directors. The board should meet regularly, retain full and effective control of the company, and monitor the executive management. There should be a clearly accepted division of responsibilities at the head of a company, which will ensure a balance of power and authority such that no one individual has unfettered powers of decision. Where the chairman is also the chief executive, it is essential that there should be a strong and independent element on the board with a recognised senior member. Besides, all directors should have access to the advice and service of the company secretary, who is responsible to the board for ensuring that board procedures are followed and that applicable rules and regulations are complied with. Non-executive directors. The non-executive directors should bring an independent judgment to bear on issues of strategy, performance, resources, including key appointments and standards of conduct. The majority of non-executive directors should be independent of management and free from any business or other relationship which could materially interfere with the exercise of their independent judgment, apart from their fees and shareholding. Executive directors, there should be full and clear disclosure of directors' total emoluments and those of the chairman and highest paid directors, including pension contributions and stock options. The company's annual report, including separate figures for salary and performance-related pay. Financial reporting controls. It's the duty of the board to present a balanced and understandable assessment of their company's position in reporting of financial statements, providing true and fair pictures of financial reporting. Their directors should report that the business is a going concern with supporting assumptions or qualifications necessary. The board should ensure that an objective and professional relationship is maintained with the auditors. Considering the role of auditors and addressing a number of recommendations to the accountancy profession, the annual audit is one of the cornerstones of corporate governance. It provides an external objective check on the way in which the financial statements have been prepared and are presented by the director of the company. The Cadbury recommendation that a professional objective relationship between the board of directors and auditors should be maintained so as to provide to all a true and fair view of the company's financial statements. Auditors' role is to design audit in such a manner so that it provides a reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatements. Further, there's a need to develop more effective accounting standards which provide important reference points against which auditors exercise their professional judgment. Secondly, every listed company should form an audit committee which gives the auditors direct access to the non-executive members of the board. The committee further recommended for a regular rotation of audit partners to prevent unhealthy relationship between auditor and management. It also recommended for disclosure of payment to the auditors for the non-audit service of the company. The accounting profession, in conjunction with representatives of preparers of accounts, should take the lead in developing a set of criteria for assessing effectiveness, developing guidance for companies on the form in which directors should report, and developing guidance for auditors on relevant audit procedures and the form which auditors should report. However, it should continue to improve its standards and procedures. Dealing with the rights and responsibilities of shareholders. Shareholders, as owners of the company, this is in the opinion of the Cadbury report, elect the directors to run the business on their behalf and hold them accountable for its progress. They appoint the auditors to provide an external check on the directors' financial statements. The committee's report places particular emphasis on the need for a fair and accurate reporting of the company's progress to its shareholders, which is the responsibility of the board. It's encouraged that the institutional investors' shareholders to make great use of their voting rights and take positive interest in the board functioning. Both shareholders and board directors consider how the effectiveness of general meetings could be increased, as well as how to strengthen the accountability of boards and directors to the shareholders. All of that sounds perfectly reasonable, and some of it, coming about as it did back in '92, should have been enough to actually deal with some things. But it's worth pointing out that Enron actually only had 2 insider members of its board. It was actually very compliant with many of the rules and regulations of the time and should have been effective. So Cadbury has established itself as a world leader in putting forward these suggestions and has started to go to the US, and actually many of the companies such as Enron, such as WorldCom, were actually compliant with this. There are a number of extra Sons of Cadbury that came out up to 1999, and these in the term report have actually evoked quite a bit of controversy. One of the big arguments was actually all these regulations were extremely excessive, and as usual, after each disaster, when they start to push forward some changes and some ideas to introduce changes, they are first accepted, but then they start to be pushed back on. As we've seen in other videos, that Basel II and III and Sarbanes-Oxley has survived until the present day, but it has been touch and go in many places, and we'll be looking again at that a bit later on. But Deloitte Thomas II International actually produced a report in 1996 which said, entitled Avoiding Corporate Governance Overload. So it's very direct, very useful example of using a title to be very direct and specific as to what you're going on. We've also seen, like I said, since these reports came out and since people actually started to make it the world leader in the process way of doing it, prior to the arrivals of Basel and Sarbanes-Oxley, that actually there were big question marks over how effective it actually was. Yeah. And like I said, actually, although the Institute of Internal Auditors were arguing very strongly for internal control and effectiveness, reporting the effects of internal control, there's a very strange political hot potato, as many recommended that merely commentating on the reasonableness of internal control rather than the effectiveness seemed to be a way of actually dealing with these businesses and the reports. Same time, we have the Walker Report. This one is mostly aimed at FTSE 100 businesses and major building societies, and it is simply at first to start with, because you must tell us how much your top people earn within bands. It should talk to remuneration committees. They should have a remit to be enhanced, and they should make sure that they can force through a chair to face re-election if in remuneration report fails to score 75% support. So unless 75% of shareholders can support a vote, then the chair should face re-election. Yeah. Board risk committees should be mandatory for FTSE 100 banks and life assurers, and there should be a new and strengthened role of chief risk officer whose job is actually to protect and be answerable for the behaviour of the company. The chair should always have to face annual re-election. All these are reports that are coming through. NEDs to be given increased time commitment and FCA's vetting process to be strengthened to enable them to actually take a proper role. The problem up to this point was that the FSA and NED were not actually having the time to actually have a proper commitment to allow them to actually properly implement the procedures they're supposed to be following. And actually, it's a time to actually say that we should get away from the amateur boards that the UK had been common with and introduce a much more professional requirement. This would actually be in a system that would affect not only the UK model, but would affect those models in the Far East with very family-oriented boards in which many of the second and third generation may be woefully underqualified and unsuitable to serve on a board. And actually, there should be an opportunity to say to institutional investors they should be supporting stewardship approaches in order to overcome the pressures to push to agency approaches and to pressure the more classic neoclassical approaches that suggested encouraged actually some of the poor behaviour we'd seen in the past. At the same time, as form reports are coming in, there's a big expansion in the need for invisible hand solutions to the problems. And we see this happening a lot across the US and UK specifically, of course. One of these ideas is actually something that actually came in as part of the marketing corporate control in the ways of actually implementing and affecting marketing corporate controls, where subordinated debt is used to raise capital instead of actually investment. And in fact, subordinated debt can fully replace shareholder ownership and shareholder investment, and let companies take it on instead. But the idea as well is that actually the problem isn't actually that companies are badly run. The problem is that the government is not paying companies when they are doing good, and it is not fining them or is not making them pay. So the polluter pays principle is extended into all areas of corporate governance, and all externalities should be priced in. These are strong efforts to reinforce the invisible hand solutions, that actually the market is not failing because of the behaviour of the companies. The market is failing because the government regulations don't price in externalities. That markets are basically inefficient, and the problem with markets being inefficient is caused by information asymmetry. So how do we overcome information asymmetry? Two suggestions: a data repository, a central data repository where companies are required to put all the information about their financial situation, which investors and the market can then access, and the market will become more efficient. Reducing information asymmetry will also reduce transaction costs. That's a very important point. And so far, we set up a transaction platform which provides economic and strategic incentives to rewarding disclosure. So effectively, if you tell people information, you will have some of your costs of doing business, some of your costs of trading, some of your costs of raising capital, some of your costs of issuing shares and receiving shares reduced deliberately by government intervention, a sort of eBay or Amazon for corporate finance. And that was actually a suggestion that would quite seriously would seem to reduce some of the transaction costs and thus remove the danger of agency behaviour, etc. So all of these are ways of setting up and supporting the idea of having a very solid market and corporate control across the corporation, to encourage more countries to take on this approach. Of course, there are plenty of other different cultural solutions, and we're going to look very briefly at these because we've addressed them throughout videos, etc., give more information about the various sorts of network governance. So obviously the corporate governance through the setting of networks is more common in the Mediterranean countries, Spain, Italy, southern France, Greece, some parts of North Africa, etc., where companies look to one another to support one another and cross directorships, etc. We have second boards in Northern Europe. It's a major institution, something that's actually set up to overview the formal financial board, and there are some people encouraging this, and in fact there are evidence that some companies in Northern Europe are desperately trying to move away from this. They feel it inhibits their ability to do business. In the US, UK, EU, we often talk about the free markets, but actually historically they actually had the visible hand, did they not? We talked about Chandler, and Chandler set up a system there. But actually, this sort of traditional licensing on markets can be seen elsewhere as well. You see it across Germany with the kind of the very big network of universities for training managers to a high level. And you see it in France, the École Supérieure, where people are trained to be businessmen and trained to be the leaders of industry and leaders of the economy. So this is not just something that has been within Chandler's reports on the US. And you also have issues on that, the family governance, where family is supposed to keep an eye on one another, a family of companies as well as, and these are some of these family businesses out in the Korea, etc., and areas around that are actually vast corporations. We have the stakeholder appearance, which is obviously associated with the EU, but there's also a major effort for stakeholders in some of the ways that China, where the government is trying to regulate the way companies behave and what they do, and on occasions forcing them to hold levels of capital and to make certain investments to benefit the society as a whole, as the Chinese company is very, very much against allowing this sort of inequalities to develop that would cause large unrest, as China is extremely concerned about stability. And of course, we have other solutions, the new capitalist ideas that come out of the US, but is available elsewhere. But it's a new US model, which still has elements of shareholder value, still has elements of the free market, but works mostly towards doing that. And there are the institution management, older US UK elements in Northern Europe, etc. And the idea here is, of course, that what we're looking at is an attempt to develop some of the ways of taking this forward, where the institutions will start to use stakeholder methods, will start to use network methods, start to move some elements perhaps taken off the Northern Europe areas to bring in a more effective thing. But of course, these institutions themselves is that there are cross-fertilisation, because some of them are very much set up in a way that suggests they are reliant on educated managers, an almost Chandler-esque approach. And there are lots and lots more that we should know about by now as we've gone through this examination of the existing different ways in which companies have been governed over the years, and see how many of those are still existing and are relevant to the present day. So how would you comply specifically across borders when there are so many different ways of regulating it? Well, if there is no convergence that you can look to, or if there's limited convergence, you may well look to say, well, actually, there is residual convergence. We've seen some areas where accountancy methods have been brought together. So if we allow for the fact that there's a tendency perhaps for some accountancy purposes to align, but it still allows other things. So maybe what you actually need is, in each country, you set up a joint venture with local businesses, which align specifically. The joint venture can be structured within that country to the needs of that country. And you can look at that from perhaps in which you are a minor stake for local operatives, a stakeholder approach that just gives some of the local operatives some ideas. And you see this sometimes with Chinese investment in Africa, where in some positive areas they are making a real effort, unlike some of the Western investments, to train locals, to give them locals managerial training, to get them into actually a position where they can be experienced, where they can start to run areas of the business themselves, and investment like that. But you also have a situation where you actually, it can be the main stake could be held locally. And in this case, you might actually just be looking to provide elements of capital, but actually this is almost burlesque in its approach. It's not trying to run anything, it's a kind of an international level of speculation, but accepting that when you speculate within somebody else's economy, you speculate according to their local rules. You can operate on areas of network governance, where actually you move into a country and or a product or service specialist. So you're looking to get people to involve in your board. And across Europe, this is quite common among politicians, but there are plenty of other things where you can actually recruit local advisors, local governments, local experts on the local economy. But for instance, two examples you may want to look up: Gert Schroeder and Mary Robinson have taken on well-known positions in which they've actually acted as representatives of other countries to their own country and help people with investments, etc., and cross-border investments, and people looking to actually build up their own industries and businesses. You have an element of course around franchising. Perhaps rather than setting up your own companies, you will actually give people your business model, and this can be small companies as well as major, but it can also be major companies as well, major franchises, where you set up under the local structure, and then you just give them the right to use your business model, and they set themselves up and run themselves according to whatever the local regulations are. So that's one way in which you can become compliant while still managing to hopefully extract some sort of value and profit from the situation. There's licensing as well. Okay, Disneyland Paris, for example, is a major theme, but mostly Disneyland Paris is not a subsidiary of Disneyland. It is actually, in itself, an independent company that operates under a license and pays licensing fees. It was why it was, for many, many years, it was making losses in France, but was actually very profitable for the US company because they were being paid through licenses. So they got paid regardless of whether or not the actual local Disneyland made a profit. Though, of course, those days have passed and is now quite a profitable business. Or you could set up a special investment vehicle. But again, this could be similar to a setting up a franchise, which comes apart from the fact it is purely a financial institution which is looking for areas to place money and make investments and buy shares in various companies that are local. And that's one of the major approaches that can be used.